It's difficult to put into words what Gauntlet Dark Legacy means to me, and the way I feel every time I boot it up. It's like a direct line to my childhood, to a life that doesn't exist anymore. It's crazy to think that a game I picked up off of a Blockbuster shelf in the early 2000s would have such a profound effect to this day. It is truly a timeless classic that taps into the deepest sense of nostalgia. It makes me wonder, is it just pure nostalgia that makes this game so special? Or does it possess a quality that allows it to imprint itself on our lives in such a significant way? Today we'll be taking a look at the various ingredients and characteristics that make up Gauntlet Dark Legacy to answer these questions and explain what made it such an extraordinary game. Dark Legacy was released on console by Midway Games West in 2001. It was the sixth installment in the Gauntlet series, and was actually developed as an expansion to Gauntlet Legends, but I would describe it more as an expanded remaster of Legends. Dark Legacy expanded and improved upon nearly all aspects of Legends. It doubled the amount of characters and realms, improved the quality of the graphics and effects, and increased the overall speed of the game. These improvements, among other things, injected life into the game and contributed to making Dark Legacy stand out more than any title in the Gauntlet series. The story of Gauntlet Legends and Dark Legacy is really quite simple. The benevolent wizard called Sumner ruled over the 8 realms in prosperity, before his jealous brother Garm released the demon Scorn from the underworld in an attempt to seize control of the realms. Scorn quickly broke free from Garm's control, imprisoned him, and released his minions upon the realms. As one of the heroes called forth by Sumner, we embark on a quest to defeat the demon Scorn, and ultimately the evil wizard Garm. That's pretty much the gist of Gauntlet Legends and Dark Legacy's story, at least on the surface level. The community has, however, extracted quite a bit of information on the game's deep backstory, so much so that the information has been compiled into a 193-page long document titled The Book of Bennetts. It refers to a few of the developers, Stephen Bennett, Mike Howley, and KJ Holm, as omnipotent entities existing in the Gauntlet universe. It also details a network of hidden areas and liminal spaces in the game that make up an ultra world, and a balance of elemental powers. The idea that the developers exist as gods within the game is particularly interesting to me. The devs do make appearances in the game, but I'm not so sure that they intended their presence to be interpreted as omnipotent, as many of these appearances are more on the silly side and, in my opinion, point toward them just having fun with the game's development, and perhaps attempting to leave a personal mark within the permanence of the game. This theory might have more to do with answering my underlying questions about Dark Legacy's extraordinary nature than the alternative. Is it possible that by putting so much of their humor and overall character into it, the developers may have given a soul to the game itself? Nevertheless, Dark Legacy has a certain undeniable charm that absolutely contributes to its extraordinary nature. I'm not going to go too much more into the Book of Bennetts in this video. It would take hours to cover everything, but I'll leave a link to it in the description if you're interested in checking it out for yourself. In general, I think it says a lot about Dark Legacy and its developers that these passionate members of the community were able to extrapolate so much information from the game, adding an incredible level of context to its backstory. Even though the graphics are clearly a little dated, the overall aesthetic of the game retains an eye-catching charisma, even down to its artwork and cutscenes. And I couldn't get through this video without mentioning the music. Sometimes I find myself throwing on the Dark Legacy soundtrack randomly while I'm driving or even playing other games. There is just something very attractive about the game's overall aesthetic, and I don't think it can be boiled down to simple nostalgia. I remember being instantly seduced by the game's artwork the day I discovered it. Dark Legacy's gameplay is not without its flaws, which should be expected from a game released over 20 years ago. That being said, and this might be my sentimentality talking in large part, but I'd argue that the game holds up quite well today. Let's start at the beginning. Dark Legacy offers a huge selection of different characters, appealing to just about every fantasy role you could imagine. You start out with 8 characters, all with unique starting stats and abilities, and as you progress through the game, you'll be able to unlock up to 9 additional characters, and you have a selection between 4 color themes for each character, meaning there are 68 possible character variations to choose from, and that's without mentioning the many secret characters unlockable with cheat codes. While I wouldn't exactly call it character customization, the raw amount of options allows for a large degree of character personalization. For me, this was one of the game's strongest initial hooks. Dark Legacy's combat is where things start to get a little basic by today's standards. It consists of fast and slow ranged attacks, melee combat with some melee combos, a dash feature knocking down enemies, a turbo meter allowing for the use of a couple ultimate abilities unique to each character, multiplayer exclusive moves that can be used in close proximity with other players, and a blocking feature, seldom used in my experience. It sounds like, well, a lot. And it is. I suppose it's not necessarily the game's combat that is lacking by today's standards, but more so the difficulty of the game that doesn't demand much in the way of combat mastery. There are a few difficulty settings to choose from in the game's menu, but from what I can tell, upping the difficulty doesn't make too much of a difference. To be honest, the camera angles are the most difficult enemy you'll be fighting, and the game does throw a slew of unique enemies at you. Most of these monsters also change appearance as you progress through the realms. I remember the first time I played through the game, this was one of the most exciting things about unlocking a new realm. You'll also find a unique boss battle, as the final stage at the end of each realm. Bosses are usually pretty well scaled, and can be made much easier by first collecting the item of legend corresponding to the boss. Dark Legacy has a huge number of items, including keys, potions, food, and various equipables that grant effects for a limited time or number of uses. One of my favorites is Anti-Death, which allows the player to equip a halo that drains health or experience points from death. It would take way too long to detail all of the items in the game, but they definitely add a lot of flavor to the combat and gameplay overall, particularly when you introduce the competition of multiplayer when everyone is racing to grab the good items first. An interesting note on items, there are 2 different design philosophies regarding item activation that appear depending on the console you're playing on. Items are activated immediately upon pickup on the arcade and PlayStation 2 versions, while the GameCube and Xbox versions allow you to store items in your inventory for later use. The GameCube and Xbox versions of item management are definitely more desirable in my opinion, giving the player way more control over items found or purchased. But it's also worth noting that due to an increase in glitches, these versions of the game received lower ratings than the PlayStation 2 version, which generally had much smoother performance. It is interesting that these 2 variations exist across the different platforms though. Speaking of collecting items, progression through the game's realms is gated behind the collection of crystals and golden dragon parts. This system actually works very well. It is tuned in such a way that it's important to pay attention to collecting them, but I rarely find that I need to go back and replay levels in order to progress. Runestones and boss shards are also tied to progressing through the game. Runestones are a little easier to miss, but usually the game does a good job of hinting at their location. On a related note, I would mention that the rate at which you gain experience and level up feels very consistent throughout the entirety of the game. Every 10 levels your character gets a cosmetic upgrade, and that always feels really cool. Overall, character progression in Dark Legacy is very satisfying. There is quite a bit more that could be said about Dark Legacy's gameplay features, but the most important takeaway here is that the game does an excellent job of maintaining its pace while allowing players to feel a strong sense of character and story progression. These are qualities that can contribute to a strong sense of immersion. When you consider its immersive gameplay, alongside the charming and captivating aesthetic of the game, you can start to see why Dark Legacy is held so dearly by its fanbase. Remember how I mentioned the developers having a presence in the game? In case you were wondering, this can be found in a couple different places, most notably in the Desert Realms coin level, featuring the studio at Midway and most of the development staff. Level designer KJ Holm is featured in the Dream Realms Carnival posters. Dark Legacy's fanbase as a whole seems to be driven by a similar level of nostalgia and love for the game. So much so that there is in fact a private team taking on the project of remastering the game in HD. I've been cheering these devs on for years and patiently waiting to see what they do with the game. I'll have a link to their community Discord in the description below, so you can go check out some of the awesome stuff they've been working on for yourself. It's undeniable that nostalgia plays a huge part in making this game so special to all of us. It highlights a special time in our lives. But I think there is more to it than that. I think Dark Legacy holds a certain quality that interacts with this nostalgia and sentimentality we all hold for it, giving the game something of a soul of its own. Gauntlet Dark Legacy is the game that got me into RPGs and heavily into gaming in general. It became the basis for how I judged video games. It led me into other RPGs like World of Warcraft, and remained a constant figure for comparison. I can honestly say that this game changed my life. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you're interested in checking out more upcoming content. Let me know your experience with Dark Legacy in the comments below.
Game over. I see.